Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. The Muscle Expert Podcast. Today I have a very special guest, one of the men I deem to be at the cutting edge of hypertrophy training. And we're going to have a pretty awesome conversation about science, about the validity of research. We're going to have a conversation about how to optimize training. Mr. Brad Schoenfeld, welcome.
Always awesome to talk to you, Ben.
Yeah, man. Dude, we haven't talked in a long time. It's been like a couple years, right? I had you on the podcast.
John Meadows,
a couple years ago, man. So I'm glad to have you back, and I know you've done a ton of great stuff, including getting your PhD in the middle there. Yep. So congratulations on that, man. That's amazing. And you know what? The thing I like about you, man, is I know you're doing research, and I know research is. I know you're limited sometimes with your demographics and being able to find people, but you're always true to your message, man. You're always true to what you're trying to achieve. And what comes from you, I know, is coming from your heart. You're not coming up with something that's BS. Trying to prove a point like some people are arguing is happening right now in science. You're there to find the answers, man, and I'm very appreciative for what you do because it helps me, man. And if I can apply what you teach, I do. If I can take what you teach and apply some type of thought process to apply it to what I do, I do. You know, there's always some type of golden nuggets that we can extrapolate from all your research, man. So speaking for myself and every other scientific meathead out there, we appreciate you, man.
Well, thanks, but I mean, that means a lot. And really, all of my research comes from my years as a practitioner. So it's basically everything. I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store now because I'm studying all the things that I thought about and wanted to know, which we didn't have evidence for when I was personal training.
You're getting paid to do cool shit now. Right. Well, that's the bottom line, right? Isn't that the ideal circumstance of everyone in the world? Yeah, I think everyone should get paid to do what they love, man. I mean, ultimately, if you're getting paid to do what you love, you're going to do such amazing work, right? Like, I go to bed at 4:15, 4:30 every day, and I got a huge smile on my face because I get to go read for an hour, I get to go study for an hour, and then I get to go write for 6 hours. Like, I love that shit, man. It makes me excited, and most people go, how the hell do you get up so early? I'm like, dude, I wish I could get up earlier. I just won't get enough sleep, you know? But it's awesome. So, yeah, like I say, man, very, very grateful for what you do.
Thanks.
What are you working on right now? So, you know, I want to work backwards, but I want to know what you're excited about right now, because obviously we're talking about being passionate, we're talking about building muscles. I know there's a number of things you've just finished, and we'll definitely talk about that, but is there something that you're kind of head first into right now that you're super pumped about?
Yeah, so I have currently, I think, upwards of 20 collaborative studies that are in review. The one that I've just finished, which really kind of floats my boat, we just finished a study on the mind-muscle connection, which is something that bodybuilders have been preaching for years, but amazingly, we've only had acute research. There's been a bunch of studies that have looked at, do you get greater muscle activation with a internal focus, which is mind to muscle, versus an external focus, thinking about just getting the weight up. And there's been studies showing greater muscle activation, but it's never been shown whether that actually translates into greater growth. And we just finished up a study. Can't say too much, but what I will say is that the study does support, from a growth perspective, at least to some extent, the belief that having a mind-muscle connection does facilitate greater growth, and the bodybuilders have been vindicated.
Man, maybe that's why I like talking to you so much, because you're substantiating what I've been teaching for the last 10 years. Eliminating the external focus and shifting everything to an internal focus. That's literally the exact verbiage I use. I often tell people to close their eyes, man, because the human nature is like what I see, I think about. So if you start thinking about the dumbbell, you start thinking about the machine, the bar, you're thinking about pushing it or pulling it or whatever it is, relative to a geographical location. But if you close your eyes and you're thinking about pulling an insertion closer to an origin, and you know what those are, it's a very valid way to think. Like, it's like a muscle is so simple, man. People complicate muscle. Obviously, internally, muscle is very complicated, but as far as external function, it's pretty damn simple, man. It's like I'm pulling this insertion closer to one end of one side of the origin, and that's really it, right? And how can I load that as effectively as possible, as maximally as possible at every inch of the range of motion? That's kind of what it deduces to, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, pretty simple, man. And I'm glad that we can start hopefully shifting the paradigm of the fitness industry, man, because as much as I'm as deep, up to my neck in this industry as everybody else, or even more so than most people, I still really believe that we're very primitive, man. We're very primitive in our thoughts. We're very primitive in our knowledge. And again, why science is so beneficial. When can we look forward to seeing the study?
Well, we just finished it, and I'm just finished writing it up, so it should go into review. The review process can be anywhere between a couple of months to a year. It just depends upon what's going on. But I would hope I'm hoping before the end of the year that this will be in publication.
Are you able to talk a little bit about like what you standardized for and what was controlled and how? Because obviously mind-muscle connection is a pretty subjective thing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you some little, and there's actually some limitations that need to be discussed. But first of all, it was in untrained subjects. It's that we didn't use a well-trained. Virtually all my research is in well-trained subjects. I deliberately chose an untrained population because my thought process was trying to get people who have been lifting to change whatever focus they've been would be difficult, or could be difficult, and that could be a confounding issue. Whereas if you're taking someone with a clean slate, we can at least say with greater confidence that they are listening, that it's called a deep basin in motor learning, when you've actually it's hard to
unlearn habits.
Than someone who has no habits. So that is a limitation that we don't know whether it will translate or how it will translate to well-trained subjects. I would think it would translate better, but that's a study that needs to be run, and I will run that study at some point.
Sure.
Now that we have this baseline. We also only use 2 exercises. We use the bicep curl and a leg extension. I wanted to keep it very simple rather than trying to do a squat where they have to try to focus on, let's say, the quads. It makes it much more simple to do a single joint exercise. So there were some limitations in that respect, and those are things that when I run the study again in more well-trained subjects, we'll do more muscles, and hopefully we'll get better clarity on.
Now, was this exclusively done in a lab, or was it something that they kind of went on their own and were able to...
No. This was a fully every aspect of the study was supervised. Every rep, the research assistant who was with them, basically as a personal trainer, would tell them, focus on the quads, focus on the biceps, versus get the weight up. So they were being coached on every rep of every set and given full supervision. We didn't just send them out and say, all right, do what you want. That would have no internal validity.
Sure. That's one of the things that you and I briefly spoke about before we started here, is the idea of the subjectivity of the execution. So I love that, as we spoke about, like everyone's execution is different. Everyone's mechanics are different. Everyone's ability to recruit a muscle is going to be completely different based on mechanics, based on the way they set up and all these other things. So the fact that you've eliminated that variable already tells me this is going to be a much more valid study than a lot of the ones out there.
Well, yeah, so in order to really draw cause and effect from a study, you need to control as many variables as possible. Now, unfortunately, unless you're going to have someone in a metabolic ward, we don't know what happens once they leave the gym. So they could go out and we get food diaries, they can be eating 10 cheeseburgers and report that they had a salad for lunch. I don't know. So there's certain things you can't control their sleep patterns, you can't control their stress levels. So outside of the gym, but what I can tell you is everything within the gym in our training was completely controlled,
right.
And thus we can get a good inference of cause and effect that any differences would be related to the training differences in the training stimulus as opposed to other confounding factors.
Sure, especially if you're randomly selecting these people, right? It's not like you're picking them. And how many people were in the study?
We had 30 subjects. It was a decent sample size. We had 3 dropouts. We had 14 in one group, 13 in the other. Which for training studies, a pretty decent sample size, and we got certainly good statistical significance on it.
Man, I'm excited to see it because, like I say, I'm all about that, right? Like I'm probably the only pro bodybuilder out there going, man, stop lifting weight and start contracting muscles.
You're first on the list of people I'm going to send the study to.
Thanks, man. I'll read it front to back for sure. Thank you very much, man. Yeah, so lots of cool things going on in science, man. I know one of the areas of focus that you've been focusing on is eccentric training, and I think so many people ask about that. I actually was asked that on social media last week. What's the value? Is there value? Can we talk a little bit about first, from your perspective, what the potential value is in training with an eccentric, or what the proposed value is training eccentrically, and then looking at what the studies have shown?
Yeah, so it's a really fascinating topic that just for those who don't know, I'm sure most do, but concentric is when you're lifting the weight against gravity. Eccentric is when you're lowering the weight with gravity. The eccentric actions from an acute standpoint have been shown to have different effects on cellular signaling. This is just on a very sciencey, basic sciencey.
So
level.
most of my listeners are pretty scientifically advanced. I get some bright people in here, and I talk in a little bit higher level. So you can talk about the type of stimulus, what's actually happening. They like that stuff.
Okay, so the signaling responses, which are ultimately what's going to affect muscle protein synthesis, as well as, by the way, the acute muscle protein synthetic response, has been shown to be different. It's altered between concentric and eccentric repetitions. So that in itself tells you that, hey, there's probably a benefit to using both. It's not just about doing a concentric rep, which a lot of people think just get that weight up and then who cares what happens on the lowering aspect.
Right.
But here's the other interesting standpoint. When you lower a weight, you're getting more muscle damage, first of all, and the lowering effect, the sarcomeres are pulling against. They're basically exerting a braking action against gravity.
Yep.
As far as gravity is going with you, and that has differential effects on how the perturbations of the muscle, the tearing, the damage to the muscle comes about. So here's the interesting thing, what we found. So we did what's called a meta-analysis, and for those who don't know, that's pooling of data. We looked at every study that was ever done that looked at the muscle growth in eccentric that looked at concentric versus eccentric and compared the muscle growth between the two conditions. And again, that exerts a level of control. Part of the problem with many exercise studies is that they're too small to be able to really see the effects. When you pool the results of all the studies, you get huge statistical power. What we found was that when we pooled all these studies, the eccentric actions had about a 10% average growth, whereas the concentric actions had about a 6.5% or so growth. So it was markedly greater. And it didn't reach what we call statistical significance, but it was just about significant, if you will. The probability was about 93%. So again, that's kind of statistical mumbo jumbo. We used what's called an effect size, and there's a pretty clear effect of these differences. Now, here's some of the caveats. The majority of the studies used an eccentric overload, so you can lower a weight at higher levels than you can lift it. So let's say if your 1 RM, let's say on a chest press is 300 pounds, well, you can lower 400 pounds, like 25% more. And what they would do, they would mismatch. Most of the studies they maxed out for a given number of reps, so they equated repetitions, not load. Could it be due to the fact that it's just heavier loading?
Sure.
We don't know, but here's what I would take home from this is that, number one, it's good to include both concentric and eccentric actions, and to make sure you're not just letting the weight drop, that you don't necessarily have to lower it really slow, but you certainly should control your lowering effect. And number two, and I think this is where it gets really interesting, and this is a study that I've already talked to some colleagues about doing, but including some eccentric overload training where you get that supramaximal stimulus potentially can be a spike to hypertrophy. So let's say having on the last set of a couple of exercises for a given muscle group, let's say a bench press, you're going to, you do your 3-4 sets of bench, and then you, let's say, have 2 or 3 lowering eccentric overloads where someone would assist you. You have a partner that would assist the concentric, so they get the weight up, and then you would just lower the weight under control. And that potentially can be a driver of hypertrophy.
Man, so again, the first thing that pops into my mind, I got a few questions, but the first thing that pops into my mind, how do they standardize for execution? So let's say I'm doing a bench press. The way you do a bench press, the way I do a bench press is completely different. If I'm tired, who's to say I'm using my chest at all on an eccentric lift or on a concentric lift? Is there any way that they are able to standardize for that?
No, so that's, again, an unfortunate and a real limitation of research. What I will say is that the people that we're getting as subjects are not the Pakulskis who have that ability. Most of them don't have that ability. So even with well-trained subjects, they're not pro bodybuilders. So there is, you have to look at what's called the generalizability. Mm-hmm. The generalizability of these types of studies to a pro bodybuilder are going to be less. Doesn't mean there's no generalizability, but certainly there will be some limitations, and you'd have to take that into account. But we can't, you can't know what's in someone's head when they're lifting and lowering. So that's always going to be a problem in terms of extraction.
You're a biomechanics professor. From a mechanics perspective, you can look at mechanical abilities of certain muscles and just be like, hey, this joint needs to stay here. Don't let this move, and standardize for that. And I think that would be something you should look at in the future, man, to give the most validity to a study. like, hey man, if your AC joint is going forward off, we know we're getting less pec recruitment. It has to be, right? So just standardizing for simple things with respect to execution. And you did a great job by choosing, the leg extension and the bicep curl, because ultimately the level.
By the way, that we do. So
yeah.
Form, now I can't speak for what other researchers, the labs of, when you go to other labs, it's going to completely depend upon how the researcher might have his undergrad students are carrying out the study, and they're not going to supervise them properly. So the level of control is going to be dependent on the lab. But certainly we do look to standardize the form. But that doesn't mean, I thought you were talking about the eccentric, specific to the eccentric.
Oh,
like in our studies, we made sure they lifted with proper form with the mind muscle, and within that form, we're telling them to carry out the movement under a given scenario. Now again, those are untrained subjects. So if you're dealing with an untrained subject, their ability to do what you do as a pro bodybuilder is night and day.
Right. I mean, but I'm talking about standardizing for things like, we're doing a squat distance from the axis, man, and making sure things are stable, like make everything kind of on the same playing field. It would just be nice to see scientists start to consider those things and just not overlook them and say, well, these don't matter, because they have to.
It is, and here's the thing. Now, in a machine, so you raised some really interesting points. In a machine, it's going to be much easier to control for those things.
Yep.
But even that, there can be some variations. But when you're talking things like squats, there is no perfect form. I can go on all day. We can have a 2-hour conversation just on squat. So if you start to change someone's kinematics, let's say I'm doing a trained subject, and we have 30 trained subjects, to a degree. Now, if they're formed, there's certain forms you just know crap. I mean, we do certainly try to standardize to some extent. But some people have longer femurs, shorter femurs. That's going to impact their kinematics.
Massive.
And you can't standardize things like that, and that's where it's going to be like to start changing it will then change their mental approach, and you're going to then open up a different can of worms. That's where studies can get. You have to take things with a certain grain of salt and understand that there are inherent limitations when you're studying, when you're pooling subjects, when you're doing a sample of a wide population as opposed to just yourself. That's why N=1 is always, you take research. I think this is a really important point. Research can only be used as a guideline. There's huge gaps in the literature.
Right.
We use this as to guide our decision making and our program design, but ultimately everyone is an N=1 experiment. So you use this to start, and then Pakulski is going to not just say, all right, this study showed this, so I'm going to do this.
Sure.
So if this study showed this, let me try this and see how it can fit in with what I'm doing.
I'm glad you bring that up, man, is because so many people out there are taking studies and saying, well, that study says this, so it has to be the truth. And ultimately, a study is only valuable, like you said, N=1. So the best approach, I think, is going to take what everyone says, like you say, the meta-analysis, and then try to deduce what's going to work for you. That's ultimately the best way, and why maybe a coach like yourself is such a valuable tool, man. I mean, ultimately, someone who can actually look at all this research objectively and go, hey, well, this is where this applies to you because this is the demographic and this is your tendencies. That's a valuable thing, man. And most guys are just looking at it blindly and saying, this research says this, and you're like, oh man, I just want to give you a hug because you're an idiot.
And that's exactly it. So I'm a huge proponent of evidence-based practice. Myself and some of my colleagues, I don't know if you know Alan Aragon, Mark Contreras, some good buddies of mine. We're all about promoting the understanding that it is not just research and it is not just practice, it's the integration of them. So you take your research is used to guide decision making, then you use your personal expertise, and you take into account the lifter's needs and abilities, and it's that trifecta, that combination of the three that's going to ultimately maximize results, and that you never can just rely on research. The unfortunate thing, we have some people in the research community who have never actually been practitioners. I always tell my students and others that ask me, if you want to be a researcher in exercise in an applied field, spend a few years in the field.
At the very least, train, right? Yeah, some guys don't even touch weights.
That will then make you a much better researcher and give you much greater insights into being able to carry out studies and what their impact is.
Sure, and I guess that's why some pro bodybuilders, not all absolutely make good coaches, is because we're the guys pushing the envelope. And I think ultimately research often starts with us. Is like, you would come to me or we would have a conversation. I go, Brad, I found this. What do you think about that? And maybe you'd be like, oh, that's an interesting thought. And then it ends up, like, that's why you've become a great researcher, because you train.
My mind to muscle study, that came from my reading Joe Weider magazines when I was a kid, So yeah, it's understanding what comes from the field. That the best research always comes from the field, and that Ben Pakulski starts telling me that something that he's getting growth through a certain technique, my ears perk up from that because you know what you're doing. You're seeing results. So.
Sure. And now one of the things I'm going to bring up, and it may be a topic of I don't want to bastardize it, but the idea of intraset stretching, man. I know there's a it's a bit of an interesting topic of conversation right now, but I'll tell you, like, truthfully from my heart, that I don't know that I found anything that gets me better results. And it's a bit, because it's a bit of one of those hot topics that people think, oh, I don't know, is that true or is it not true? I'll tell you definitively from fact, in when I was doing it most, 2013, 12, 13, 14, I don't think I found anything that matched those results. And I only say that because I think it would be an interesting thing for you to study. And my protocol was very specific. I'm happy to share it with you anytime. But my results literally were tremendous, man. And nobody else has really. Dr. Wilson has studied it, but he literally just kind of stole my stuff. I don't want to say that, but he took my study and replicated it in calves. Saw a tremendous result. But I'd like to see someone actually do it standardized for the right things and making sure it's properly executed. And I actually want to see what the results are because, truthfully, like, nothing has been close. And granted, my recovery capability at the time was tremendous. My diet was on point. My cardio was on point. Like, everything was great. But it was almost unbelievable levels of muscle growth.
So I got some good news for you then. I'm actually collaborating with a lab who was actually just carried out. Now, they didn't use your protocol, I don't think, but what we did is we carried out a study, no stretching, and then another group did isotension. They did, so it was 3 groups. So
stretching like after or intra?
It was loaded stretching within the interset period. I don't have the results, so basically, this was a group out of Italy, a good colleague of mine, just finished data collection, so I don't know what the results are yet, but I will share them with you once I find out.
So yeah, my specific protocol is actually intra versus inter. So I don't know if they're. My difference is I don't want to be giving a stretch response or stretch feedback to my muscular system, right, to my Golgi tendon. So obviously we're doing a loaded stretch, but then I immediately loaded again. Like kind of a subsequent drop set, so that I didn't get, because I think this is completely subjective at the time. The idea of stretching a muscle obviously is going to give a conflicting signal to the muscle, right? So I always wanted to end on that contraction, and like I said, that's completely subjective. But I found as though finishing a set with a stretch versus finishing a stretch with a contraction actually made a pretty substantial difference in my ability to maintain contractile ability. So I found if I stretched, my ability to maintain that aggressive level of contractile ability diminished. Whereas if I finished with a contraction, it increased. Subjective.
And then, so let me just ask, so first of all, how long was the stretch to hold at the end?
I progressed. So I started with a 20-second stretch, like for the first 2 weeks. And then once I felt as though I adapted to that, I was doing a 30-second stretch. And I would do up to as many as 3 weight drops, so 3 actual stretches in one set, but only one set, like for that protocol.
Did you then take a normal rest interval between and then start it up again, or was it you moved to a different exercise?
So I'll run you through it. So I did like 8 reps, and then with that weight, I would stretch for 20 to 30 seconds, and then I would do 8 reps and stretch for 20 to 30 seconds, and then do 8 reps, and then stretch for 20, 30 seconds, and then finish with 8 reps. And then I would rest, a longer rest, because, I just did effectively 4 minutes of work, so I would stop.
See, I'd call that interset stretching, but basically just with a short, your rest interval is 20 seconds, and you're doing a stretch. I guess it depends how you want to kind of semantics, but to me, you could say that's all one set, or you could say that
it's 4 sets.
You're taking a 20-second rest, and in that rest, you're actively resting with a stretch.
Right.
So,
okay. Yeah.
So it's somewhat similar to what we did. But anyway, I'll share that with you.
Cool, man.
I actually like that, and I think that's actually a really cool approach that I might just study.
And so try it yourself. And the best results I found, for whatever reason, were in my pulling muscles, were in back and biceps. Chest, I think, was good as well, but certain muscles are hard to do, as you can imagine. So like back, because you can get yourself into like a chest pad where you're really getting a stretch, and biceps, you put yourself into that, long incline dumbbell curl type position. Tremendous, man. Like,
So like on a lat pull down, you just let yourself.
No, back I would do like
stretch position.
So I did that, but I found with that it took me like way outside of my active range, so I ended up getting more of a teres stretch than I was getting like a lat stretch. So if I maintained like a bit of a a backward lean position, that I could maintain it, but I found best results in a row position, so like a supported type row. Yeah, so even though it's not like maximum length in position, it's all, at least you can direct where the stretch is going.
Like a hammer rower? Or?
Yeah, exactly. And I actually sometimes added load to the stretch, right? Because like if I'm doing a weight that I can do in the short position, it's probably going to be pretty light for me to stretch with. So I had some people would actually add manual resistance or add some additional plates on there. But anyways, man, digression or a little bit of a tangent.
No, that's great. I love hearing this type of stuff because again, those are the types of things that float my research curiosity and drive my future projects.
And the only other thing that moves the needle is execution, man. So you study that with the mind-muscle connection stuff. That's the only other thing. Like obviously all these intensifiers are awesome, but it's all subjective based on volume, which is the next thing I want to talk about, man, is I always say everything starts with execution. If your execution sucks, it doesn't matter how many sets or reps you do. But progressing from there, how should people be looking at volume? Because you get this question as much as me. How many sets do I do? How many reps do I do? And how many's optimal? And the answer is, I'll let you.
Well, the answer is, first of all, that my answer will always be it depends. So there's always going to be huge inter-individual variability.
Yep.
That's another reason why a research study is never going to tell you what to do, because when we report the results of the study, we're reporting the means. But there's people down here, there's low responders, higher responders, and where you fit on that continuum is going to somewhat dictate. When it comes to volume, your genetics are going to enter into it, your nutritional status, your stress levels, sleep level. I mean, there's so many factors that ultimately will go into recovery. What I would say on a general basis is that higher volumes are beneficial. And I say higher, not necessarily high, because that's subjective, what constitutes high. A recent meta analysis we carried out showed that on average, a minimum of 10 sets had greater gains than less than 10 sets per muscle per week. So 10 sets, which isn't all that high a volume. I mean, 10 sets.
Let me ask you, what's the demographic there? So obviously that to me is again subjective, based on like a beginner needs a hell of a lot more volume than like say a pro bodybuilder could. And in my opinion, tell me if this is consistent with your opinion, the more advanced trainee would require less volume. Does that sound right?
Yes
and no?
Actually, right. I could go either way on that.
Sure.
I can make a case where they might need more because you start getting closer to your ceiling. I'll actually get into that a little more, but the subjects were primarily untrained, to your point. We found that there wasn't enough studies to say it was 15 better. It could be 15, 20, and we just don't know. There wasn't enough studies with the higher volume. But here's what I'd say, and I think this is particularly the case with more experienced trainees. So we know that experienced trainees generally speaking, their tolerance is greater. They are able to push more, and they're closer to their genetic ceiling. But the overtraining aspect, they also can train harder, which potentially within that volume can make them overtrain to an easier extent, depending upon how hard they're pushing on each set, which of course is another variable that's going to come into it. But what my general advice is that to periodize volume, some people will be, so you have a lower volume, a moderate volume, and a higher volume. So your higher volume would be culminating in a period of functional overreaching where you look to, I always liken it to going to the edge of a cliff without falling over the cliff.
Right.
And then you pull back. Within the lower, moderate, and higher categories, and they might be each a month each. That's a general recommendation. So a month lower, let's say you have a 3-month cycle and cycle across that way. Within those categories, I mean, some people might be good at 5 sets per muscle per week. Some people in the lower range, some people might be 10 sets per muscle per week. And then it might be in the moderate range, 15 for one, 20 for another. That's where there's going to be interplay. And I can't, there's no way anyone could ever tell someone this is how many sets you need to do. That's where your N=1 has to come in. We can give guidelines to that, which might be, my general guidelines might be 8 sets per week per muscle in the lower, 15 in the moderate, and then 20 or so in the higher. But those can be very variable depending on the person.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, man. And, you know, so many variables like you speak about, right? Execution, the better your execution gets, is going to completely change. Mental focus on how far are you taking your sets? And that's one of the questions I think that I pose to you is, how far do you take a set? Is it, you know, the high intensity, I'm going to take this to absolute failure? Or is research saying we should stop short of failure? And again, in what demographics is that relevant?
And research really is very unclear there. Surprisingly, we'd like to think that we're so far advanced now in exercise science that there's
right.
so few studies that have looked at that. So really it comes down to mostly anecdote. There's been a couple recent studies that have tried to ascertain whether going to failure is necessary or not, and the results haven't been that great. Basically showing that probably stopping a rep or two short of failure is not going to have a decrease in results. So going past that won't necessarily improve it, and potentially it can, just logically, it can potentially hasten the onset of overtraining. But like you said, it's not an elite lifter.
Right.
So my general approach is that some sets should be taken to failure, but certainly not. If you're going to be doing 5 sets of, let's say, a bench press, maybe one of those should go to failure, your last set or so, and maybe every other. You can periodize that. Those are, again, things that we have very little clear evidence of, and it's more just anecdote, and I think a lot of N=1 experimentation.
Sure. I guess the answer is it needs to be progressive, right? If you've never done one to failure before, maybe start with 1 and don't go to 6.
Right.
Yeah, an interesting thought. Cool, man. That's fascinating stuff. One thing I wanted to bring back into the conversation, we really talked about eccentric training and concentric training, but we didn't actually get you to touch on the actual stimulus, like what's happening as far as this different types of signaling inside the muscle, because this is something that I like to touch on with a lot of my clients, how those stimuli are different and how it may affect you different physiologically. So I don't want to pass over that because I think that would be a valuable point for people to really understand.
Well, I think I'd blow people's minds if I started talking about like the MAPK pathway and how eccentrics have been shown to have greater effects on MAPK,
yep.
And there's certain modules within MAPK that have greater effects.
I think they want to hear it, man. Let's go. Let's spill it. I want to hear it.
Eccentric.
Yeah.
But that's been shown. But when you're saying how does that, so here's one of the problems with the pathway, with looking at pathways. There's been, and we know mTOR is, of course, a master modulator of hypertrophy. Well, there's actually research showing that very, very high levels of mTOR, consistently high levels of mTOR, actually have negative, where we think, hey, that's the driver, we want to keep your mTOR. So it's the whole intracellular signaling is still it's a system that is in the works at this point. So we have what's called AMPK, which is a counter pathway. AMPK antagonizes mTOR, yep. And it's a pathway that is a energy sensor. So when your energy levels are low, like glycogen levels are low, you tend to get lower. It's going to have a negative effect on mTOR. But after resistance training, AMPK levels are very high, and we see a lot of muscle protein synthesis. So trying to tease all these things out from a signaling standpoint, still I'm hesitant to make any real conclusions from it.
So specific to AMPK being elevated after resistance training, all resistance training or very specific types?
At least the studies that have been done on the majority, yeah. I mean, when you say all, in terms of what? Like,
well, strength training versus hypertrophy versus metabolic training, would they all be?
Yeah, I have to go back and look, but yeah, I mean, it's not been studied all that much. But the majority of them, I don't know whether it's been studied like in very high reps. I don't recall offhand, but yeah, certainly low with powerlifting type training,
yeah,
and hypertrophy training, you do see an increase in AMPK. And I don't recall whether there's differential findings between the two, between powerlifting and bodybuilding, but both of them certainly do increase AMPK.
So the suggestion with the AMPK then is that it's primarily based off nutritional status, so energy status.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'd have to. It's a good question. I think after our talk, I'll go back and look at that literature. But just intuitively, bodybuilding training would just intuitively raise AMPK to a greater degree because there's greater energy expenditure.
Sure.
You're using your glycogen stores are going to be much more involved, and with powerlifting, which is primarily relying on your ATP PC system.
So that would start to make an argument then, and I'd love to see this studied if it hasn't been, intra-workout carbs or intra-workout aminos. Like, is that going to blunt the AMPK effect and allow mTOR to actually have more an effect? Curiosity, right?
Yeah, and then the question begets the question: Does that make any difference? Because would that actually increase the? Yeah, it's certainly a good hypothesis.
Right.
But we don't see it blunting. The point is that the thought that AMPK is this nasty
negative thing
pathway that negatively antagonizes. We know recent studies from my lab show that hypertrophy training with non-equated volumes, so 3 sets of hypertrophy training versus 3 sets of powerlifting type training, the hypertrophy training is getting greater hypertrophy. So you're getting more AMPK, or certainly greater energy disturbance, greater energy flux, which at least theoretically would cause greater AMPK elevations, but you're still seeing greater hypertrophy than with the lower effects. So how those things tease out, we're still very far away. We've come a really long way. No one even knew what AMPK was 15 years ago.
Right.
So we've come a real long way in starting to understand the pathways, or starting to at least elucidate them, but really understanding how they work we're far away from really knowing that now.
So let's dig into that study. That sounds pretty interesting to me. I know a lot of people will be interested is the idea of comparing bodybuilding style training, or whatever we define. I'd like to hear what you define as hypertrophy bodybuilding style training compared against powerlifting style routines. What was the study? What was the demographic? And what was the loading parameters?
So I'll give you the two. So my dissertation work, which was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, looked at a bodybuilding routine versus powerlifting routine. So it was 3 sets of 10 versus 7 sets of 3. And that basically, what I looked to do was to equate the volume load, which is your sets times reps times the load. And that was in trained lifters, so average lifting experience was about 4 years. That study, I only looked at biceps. I actually looked at biceps and quads. The quad, we didn't get enough good data to report the quad. But even that, we did see very similar growth across muscles between a volume-equated powerlifting versus volume-equated hypertrophy. So 3 sets of 10, 7 sets of 3 got really just as much hypertrophy as 3 sets of 10. I then followed that up and said, all right, so if you're equating volume, basically volume is a huge driver here, regardless of how heavy it is and what your actual time under tension because the time under tension probably was equated across, actually look at that, but if you actually added up the time under tension in the respective, because there were 7 sets, they would have equated. So, but I said, all right, so we showed that the volume is the driver. What about if you didn't equate the volume? You just did 3 sets of 3 versus 3 sets of 10. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's where we found greater hypertrophy really across the muscles, particularly in the upper body musculature. It showed greater hypertrophy, biceps, triceps. The legs were not shown to have actually somewhat similar growth. Interesting.
So in the legs, you just didn't see any growth? Was it just too low
they
volume?
Grew, but it was just similar. The growth was similar between the conditions. All my studies, the people grow. The thought that you have that you're tapped out now. Look, as you get to be a pro bodybuilder, you can start to tap out more. But when you're training 3+ years, every one of my studies, on average, we grow anywhere between 5 to 10%. I show that pretty much every study I've done in trained subjects has seen roughly that growth. That's
always the question, right? Is because everyone's kind of coming in with a different starting point, and how do you know how much volume is going to be adequate to actually cause the hypertrophy response? That's why I asked the question. So what are you literally just doing 3 sets to failure kind of thing? Or?
So one thing else, we push the crap out of these people. So you're used to training hard. These people are resistance trained subjects, but they're recreationally trained. They're guys that go to the gym, I'll do some curls, and we take them. Basically it's an 8-week overreaching phase that we push them through.
Yep.
So they're pushed really hard and much harder than most are used to training. And we get some jacked guys at my school, but even then, a lot of times they're relying on their genetics, and when we actually take them through the workout, they feel it. But we do 7. We'll do usually it's a total body routine, 3 days a week. We'll use like a chest press, a shoulder press, lat pull down, a row, a squat, a leg press, and a leg extension. That's kind of a typical routine. And in this case, 8 to 12 reps, 3 sets.
How much are you managing the nutrition? Is it just kind of like, hey, take off and do what you want to do? Are you standardizing for protein in some way?
Yeah, so we do give them a protein shake post-workout to try to help them. We can talk about this a little more. The talk that really has an anabolic stimulus is now seriously called into question. Like having a protein shake immediately after training versus waiting a few hours probably does not have much effect. Maybe for a bodybuilder,
Right.
It might have small effects, but the protein timing window is something, another hobby horse that I've done, and that seems to be a lot more hype than it is actual science. But with that said, at least we're getting them more protein because they're college kids who eat crap. They're on their college diet. They're going to the cafeteria. So basically what we tell them is to follow your normal diet. Don't change your diet. Don't start, all right, now I'm doing a program, so I'm going to go and follow the Ben Pakulski nutrition plan or something. Basically, they're just following the same diet so we can, again, hopefully not have confounding from that. And we can know that it's not due to any changes in their dietary practices.
So you're bringing up the nutrient timing window. I think, you made an argument a few years ago about the idea that the only time it really becomes relevant is if you plan on training again in the next few hours, or you plan on training the get body part again. You still have that school of thought?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
There's no question that, and especially from a carbohydrate standpoint, that if you're glycogen depleted, it's going to have negative effects on your performance. So if you're doing 2 days, let's say you're going in the morning and then coming back and training later, like the old Arnold type workout, and it's for the same body part too. That's important. Like if you're doing an upper one in the morning and a lower, it probably is not going to have much effect there. But for, let's say you're doing back in the morning and you come back in the biceps in the evening, very important for that. And again, I can't say, so the studies that have been done on that, could there be a benefit? Yeah, if there is. So we haven't really found any in the research that's been carried out, and there's limitations to it. If there is, I can say with a good deal of confidence that any effect is rather small. Now, for a pro bodybuilder, that small effect might be the difference between winning and losing a competition.
Right.
When I work with pro bodybuilders and any high-level bodybuilder, I always tell them, you know what? I don't know. Get a protein shake quickly after you finish.
Sure.
It's not going to hurt you, and it potentially can help.
Yep.
But if you're the average guy who's, we're just looking to gain muscle and lose some body fat, it's not going to have any. I can say with a good deal of confidence. If you wait a couple hours and have a sluggish shake 2 hours after training versus taking it immediately after, you're not going to look any different.
So I think one of the things that a lot of people will be interested in is discussing how exactly you measure and gauge hypertrophy, talking about some of the methods you guys are actually using to measure these results.
Yeah, so in my lab, now there's multiple ways, there are multiple measures that can be used. I use ultrasound testing, which is a very good measure. You actually see the muscle, so it's specific to the muscle. I can actually look at a biceps. I can see the fat-skin interface. I can see the bone. Everything between that is the muscle. We get good quality images. It's B-mode ultrasound. So I get very good measurements. It's somewhat of a step down from MRI, which is just a clearer, when you do an MRI, it's a clearer picture, but an MRI is $1,000 a pop.
Right.
So unless you're very well funded, and no one's funding bodybuilding studies for $40,000 for MRIs. So it gives a very good gauge. We also use what's called bioelectrical impedance analysis, which is kind of like DEXA, similar to DEXA, where we get a segmental muscle mass. It'll tell me how much mass is in the arms, how much mass is in the trunk, how much muscle mass is in the lower extremities. It uses certain estimates where it's not as good as your direct ultrasound measurements, but it does at least give you another perspective of that. And there's other measures. CT scan, computerized tomography is a good measure too, but there's radioactive elements to it, and again, it's much more expensive.
Right.
So we find ultrasound, which is completely benign. I can do multiple studies with it without having any negative effects. We use it for pregnant women, so it's going to
there's actually some research coming out now that's extremely dangerous for pregnant women. It's very, very new, but these women doing all these like 3D ultrasounds and stuff. Yeah, I'll send you the research. I just looked at it last week.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see that.
Interesting. Cool, man. That's fantastic. One thing I wanted to ask you. Hold on. What was I going to ask you here? Brain fart. Cellular hydration levels. So you're looking at ultrasounds. Is that going to be massively influenced by hydrations?
It could. So what we do is we wait 48 to 72 hours post-study to do our. We would never measure a muscle immediately after or even a day after training, because there's still some swelling effects from edema, or potentially from the edema of the previous workouts. We always wait, and it's been shown, we have literature that shows if you wait a minimum 48 hours, that really any effects of swelling are diminished, if not completely gone, particularly over time. Now, if you're doing someone where I would say there'd be issues with it, let's say we're doing an acute study in an untrained subject, it's the first time ever training, they can have edema for a week.
Mm-hmm.
If you overwork them, let's say I'm doing heavy eccentrics, they can have edema for an extended period of time. But over the course of a study, the repeated bout effect is going to negate any of those effects. And if you wait 48, 72 hours, the literature shows it's not an issue.
I'm not very, I've seen a few ultrasounds of muscles, but I'm not very familiar. Are you able to differentiate between what is actual, myofibrils and what is water, or is it just kind of like a big space?
No, you can. There are ways to do that, but we don't look at that. So again, you're assuming that and which is true, the fluid level to fibril level tends to remain very constant.
Sure, yeah.
It's a 3-to-1 ratio generally across. So as long as there's not edema within the muscle, you just make that assumption. So it's just not something that's been relevant to me to look at. Basically, when I measure, you can see the fat-skin interface. So
yeah.
Where the fat and skin
yep.
Stop, then that's where the muscle starts. And then you'll see the humerus or the femur. You'll see the bone, and you just measure from point to point and get a very accurate measurement. When we do what's called an intra-class correlation on ICC, which basically it shows the reliability. So I'll take you and I'll have you come in one day, I'll do a ultrasound on your muscle, have you come back the next day, I'll do the same thing, and then we compare how close they were, and we have like a 98%, depends on the muscle, but anywhere between 95 to 98% ICC reliability rate.
Now, which muscles are you testing? Is it always, like, say you're doing your quad training, is it just always the vastus lateralis, or are you actually testing all four, or what's the process?
So I generally do depends on the study. The lateralis is almost always done. I generally do the rectus femoris, biceps, and triceps. So in the quads, I actually don't, I do what I call it the lateral thigh and the mid thigh, because when I do the lateralis, I measure to the bone. I don't look. You can actually look and measure the actual lateralis thickness, but basically to the bone, you're also going to have the vastus intermedius
right
there. I just measure the muscle growth. So I figure just gauge the entire muscle growth is to me a more relevant stat than just looking muscle specific.
Right. That's why I ask. So it's more than one spot.
Yeah. So I generally do for the thighs. I'll do the mid thigh, the RF, which also has the vastus intermedius, and then the vastus lateralis.
Cool, yeah, because that was one thing that I noticed in some of the studies that I was privy to was, testing one spot and not accounting for individual variances. Like someone could use their VMO a hell of a lot more than they use their vastus lateralis or vastus intermedius or whatever, and not account, like you have to do some type of multiple measurements to account for individual variances, right?
Well, and I'll give you this too. So another potential limitation is that there is, especially in the quads, there's good evidence that you get non-uniform hypertrophy.
Right.
So we only measure at one point, and it's possible that they're getting, let's say in the proximal portion of the distal, we're measuring mid-thigh. Could they have gotten greater, one gotten greater? Those are things I can't account for, and certainly it's a limitation of the studies we do. And even look, if you do, so I could do serial, and it's been done, something I could do, it's just so tough. I'm doing so many measurements, and the time-consuming nature, you have to cut at a certain point,
yep.
or you'd be testing all day.
Or
so
people won't come back.
A proximal, a mid, and a distal for
right.
each of the muscles, but then that's over three times because it's even more than 3 times the time commitment. So each study I'm doing is taking a good ultrasound study, 20 minutes, sometimes a half hour, depending on the subject. And you're talking an hour and a half of doing the test, or in addition to all the other stuff, it just gets unruly.
Sure, and not only for you, but for the participants. Like you got to keep people coming back, man. And I know exactly how that is. I mean, it's sometimes like stroking egos and being very friendly, and man, know exactly what you're going through.
And they have to get to class or something. So then we have to extend the testing sessions across 6 days instead of 3. So it just again would get very something that I'd like to do. It just has not been practical.
One question that I'm very curious to know is, so you're focusing most of your research or all of your research on hypertrophy mechanisms and not really nutritionally, right?
Well, hypertrophy outcomes really. So I mean, I've done some work mechanistically. So that's mostly collaborative efforts. We don't do biopsies in my school because New York is kind of not very friendly to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, so I've collaborated with a number of groups in Brazil, in Spain. We've looked at mechanistically, like at things like MGF, mechanical growth factor. We've looked at myostatin. I've been in studies in other intracellular pathways. So we tend to look at mechanisms, or I do, in collaborative efforts. I've been more focused on looking at variables and how their outcomes are. So looking at rep ranges, looking at volume, looking at rest intervals and things like that, and other things. As far as nutrition, I've done some fair amount of work on nutrition, but specifically, I mean, we've done some protein timing studies. We actually had one in trained subjects recently done.
Yep.
We looked at giving them immediately before working out versus immediately after working out, and then having a higher window. And basically, we didn't see anything there. By the way, that was in trained subjects. I've looked at a fasted cardio study, which was a nutritional doing. So, but when you're saying, I'm not sure when you're saying nutritional, like what.
I'm just curious what aspect, like if it's a matter of studying, like you said, sets, reps, volume, things like that, and periodization versus, nutritional influences on, like, looking at things like sugar, inflammation. So that's what I'm curious to see.
Yeah. That's been somewhat out of my. I've done a good amount of work too, especially in collaboration on some supplements. Like I've been involved in CLA research, creatine research, mint extract, and a bunch of other supplements that we've worked on. That's somewhat outside. When we're looking at inflammatory response, it's a little outside of my current focus.
So tell me what's exciting and going on with the mechanical growth factors and the myostatin. Is there anything there that seems exciting?
Nothing in the recent past. I mean, I think at this point somewhat of the status quo that there's been some questions as to how much of a factor the mechanical growth factor is. I still think so. There was one study that came out a couple of years ago that really questioned its role in the growth process. I have issues with the study itself. And again, one study never. You always have to consider that a piece of a puzzle. But I think what's more interesting is just the more we're seeing, the more questions it's all raising as to how this all fits in with the actual growth.
Right.
And there's some age-specific stuff I think that's really exciting. And by the way, that's also specific to protein intake too, which is I think that's one of the cool areas of research that is now coming into focus more as to what is optimal protein. I'm involved with a meta-analysis on that where we've kind of quantified that 2.0 grams per kilogram seems to be a good upper threshold to focus on. Where I know there's been certain studies in the past that have looked at it on an individual basis, but this is the largest meta-analysis of its kind. We looked at, I think we had over 60 studies on protein supplementation, and we found that what's called upper confidence interval was 2.0 grams per kilogram. And that's kind of big because that does show that there's been questioning of how much protein really you do need. And elderly is another really, I know that's kind of outside of probably most of your listeners here, but it's to me a very interesting line of research because the elderly tend to have protein desensitization towards growth, and that when you basically we think that elderly they're
what define elderly, Brad? What are you saying when you say elderly? What age?
30.
I was doing my middle finger up at you, man.
60 plus,
okay.
60, 65.
Yeah.
So but it's not a cutoff that when you hit 60 all of a sudden. So as you start, I mean, I kind of joke, but I mean, most sedentary people start losing muscle after the age of 30.
Right.
That's where that sarcopenia begins to hit in. So it is actually, your 18-year-olds are thinking the 30 is ancient, and from a muscle standpoint, it's use it or lose it. So you do start to get desensitized to protein, I would say, within your 30s. It's not been well studied, but certainly as you get into 40s, 50s, and then up past 60, that's what really becomes a problem.
So I love that you're starting to get into the idea of, studying myostatin and things like this. Is there any, in your near future, any thought of studying specific DNA SNPs and how those may influence hypertrophy? So maybe standardizing for someone who has versus doesn't have, and see how that, relates to hypertrophy?
So, I mean, I'm really interested in that. The focus of my research, that involves doing that type of stuff. And for me, writing those grants is just a royal pain in the butt, and then to study them is extremely time consuming and involves just a big set. I would have to really refocus what I'm doing. So in the near future, that's not my focus, but I keep up with all that stuff. And here's one thing I will say about that. Looking at genetics, I'm always wary about trying to isolate a single gene.
Sure.
There's interactions between genes. So there's been talk about like the ACE gene or the actin gene in terms of their effects on you have like a speed gene or a hypertrophy gene. There's an interaction between, we can isolate a gene and say you don't have this, you don't have this. I think it's limited to the extent to say how that's going to affect you. Now, we do know that someone who's double null for the myostatin gene, meaning they have both knockouts, are very highly muscled. And that's very, very rare. Like in humans, there's been a few documented cases. When you have one knockout, it seems to have some effects. But then there might be other people who have a myostatin knockout, and they might be skinny because there's other genetic effects.
I know one. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So the reason I ask is I've taken a pretty extensive fascination with DNA testing, and I really noticed a massive correlation. So obviously, as a bodybuilder, you're pretty in tune with your body. You know what's going on. I'm very aware of my stresses. I'm very aware of my stress levels. Very aware of my nutritional status. And I do my blood 3-4 times a year, sometimes more. So I'm aware of vitamin deficiencies and et cetera, even the way my liver functions, and looking at that and how it correlates to my DNA. It's pretty interesting to see, man. Like if you have a demographic of people who actually know what's going on in their body, and then you start looking at their DNA, they've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. I was actually surprised, and there's a good 20 to 30 SNPs that were that I was aware of. There's obviously hundreds of thousands, but there's 20 or 30 that I was very aware of that were extremely highly correlated with what I would say is true. So that's what I was asking, man, because I see that as being the future, but I see how variable it could be, right? How almost impossible to study it is when you go hundreds of thousands of SNPs all interacting in certain ways.
Yeah, and so what I would say is that I completely agree that is the future. I think that within a given period of time, maybe 20 years, maybe 50 years, I don't know, but that we will be able to customize nutrition and training, assuming you're willing to follow it, and optimize the results for people. Based on what I've seen, I don't think we're anywhere close to being there yet, but I haven't studied it maybe as much as you have to know.
I'm studying it. I'm honestly looking at, like I say, 20 to 30 SNPs and really paying close attention to those, because they've moved the needle for me, they've moved the needle for some of my clients, and I pay attention to those, and I think they give me a pretty good indication, like, hey, you should be eating this, you should be eating this, you should have more of this, less of this. And they've been pretty accurate, even to my kids. Like I have kids, and I had them tested just because out of curiosity to see how their behaviors were, and I'm looking at their tendencies to eat certain types of food based on how it's genetically laid out. I don't influence it in any way. I just sit back and I observe as a student. It's very fascinating to see, because obviously all kids are different, and you will look at why are they different, and where's the nutritional habits different, and where's their behavioral patterns different. It's very interesting to see that you can actually pick those out of the SNPs.
Well, look, the potential implications of it are huge.
Yep.
So not only for us, for the general public, but athletes, if you can do that, that could be the difference between an athlete winning a game or not, or a bodybuilder certainly.
Yep.
The implications are huge, and I'm going to be the first to champion it once I'm confident that we can get information. Sometimes I think that having information that isn't as quality as possible can be a negative. So you have to be careful making sure that you're...
I'm very slow to make suggestions. I'm just sitting back and watching myself, and I'm trying to learn about kind of one SNP every month and pay attention to it, and just learning slowly, because I don't ever expect to be an authority on it, but I'm curious, right? I don't ever want to be kind of left behind the times, stay up with the times. So, man, finishing up, I know you're obviously really busy. You're researching, but I think a lot of people want to know, a guy who's this involved in training, in hypertrophy, in nutrition, what does your nutrition regimen look like right now? What does your training regimen look like? I know you do a lot of training. You're obviously, trying to build muscle pretty actively, pretty vocally. What does it look like for Brad, and where's your goals right now?
Yeah, so fortunately or unfortunately for me, my schedule is such that I'm basically in maintenance. I mean, I do what I can. So my workouts, I do a upper body, lower body split. So my thought process is some weeks I'll make it 2 days to the gym, some weeks I'll make it 4 or even 5.
Right.
When I do an upper lower split, and I'll do within that, let's say 2 exercise chest, 2 for upper body, 1 or 2 for the chest, 1 or 2 for the shoulders, and 2 for the back. We do 2 for the back, and then sometimes arms, sometimes even not arms, because you get the ancillary work for that. And then for the legs, squats and the leg press, it's basically several for the quads and some glutes and calves and hamstrings. The way I figure it is, I'll always get at least 2 days a week, so I'll always get my entire body at least once during the week, and then I can, some weeks I'll get more, some weeks less. My nutrition is generally, so I have very good nutrition when I'm here, when I'm home. But I mean, I do go, like I travel a lot now, and I sample. One of the things I love doing when I go to, when I lecture outside of the country, it's just in Croatia, I want to sample Croatian food. I have bulked up a little, somewhat intentionally, somewhat not intentionally. But I mean, I always keep my body fat within 12, never gets above 12%. It's somewhere 10 to 12%. If I don't see at least a 4-pack, then I know I got to redo it.
It's time to cut back on the ice cream, right?
I'm not concerned about the 8-pack. So I used to be like so focused on I didn't have an 8-pack. But anyway, my point is that I'm not focused. I just don't have the time to say I'm not in my bodybuilding mode anymore,
right?
Just because of all the stuff I'm doing. But I certainly do look to maintain a good physique, and if I was going to bodybuild again, which at this point is not in my future, but if I was, I would regiment it in more what we talked about, and then be much more meticulous and varying and structurally and systematically varying volume across time. I still try to hit different repetition ranges to work the different fiber. There is some evidence that your lower reps, your heavier loads target more in your type 2 fibers, your lighter loads target more in your type 1 fibers. We actually have a paper that's in review that quite nicely shows this, and there's some other compelling research on that. So I try to have some type of periodization of getting all the different rep ranges in, loading zones, also working on different machines. We kind of talked, I think, before getting on here about a potential benefit to varying exercises, and it doesn't mean you need to do it every workout. It's not like muscle confusion or anything, but I try to at least work the muscle from different angles. If I'm going to do a flat press one day, I'll at least throw in some incline presses on another day, or a fly, try to get different movements in across the spectrum of time. So again, my training is somewhat different than if I was going to train myself for a competition, or certainly if I was training others.
So, man, you're traveling a lot. Where's your actually one thing we should talk about that we said we were getting and we didn't is fast twitch versus slow twitch. And I said to someone I want to connect you with. Is that kind of the extent of your thought process there? Is like slightly heavier weights is known to recruit fast twitch muscles, and lower weights is
not necessarily about recruitment. So it's more about the stimulation. I think that so it's been nicely shown that if you use very light loads, you can recruit. It's not clear whether you recruit the full spectrum of motor units in a pool, but certainly you'll recruit a lot of fast twitch fibers. There's no question about that. It has to do with stimulation, though, and whether I can like lift my arm right now and I've recruited a muscle fiber. It doesn't mean you're going to cause it to adapt. You're not necessarily creating an adaptive response. So what's been shown is that the heavier loads seem to target the type 2 fibers. You're going to get hypertrophy across the spectrum of fiber types with light loads and heavy loads, but that you'll get somewhat greater hypertrophy of the type 2 fibers with your heavier loading and somewhat greater hypertrophy of the type 1 fibers with your lighter loading. How that actually plays out in practice is still to be determined, but my thought process based upon, again, using the research as a guideline is to say you cover all bases, and I train anywhere between I go as low maybe about 3 to 5 reps, usually 5. Sometimes I'll do some 3s, but usually like the 5 rep is the low and up to 20 reps. That's kind of my spectrum of loading ranges, and I'll have some 3 to 5 days, and then some 8 to 12 days, and then some 15 to 20 days.
Do you vary that at all according to different body parts, or do you keep it pretty consistent?
Well, actually, I should even say not necessarily even days. What I'll do a lot is on the more on the multi-joint type movements is focus more for your lower reps, heavier loads, so your squats, your leg press, your bench press, and then on some of the more on the single joint movements, I'll go for some of the lighter kind of pump training for a leg extension, biceps curls, or chest fly, that type of thing.
Cool, man. So one of the things I wanted to ask is you're doing a lot of traveling. What's your favorite city other than New York?
Favorite city is Rome. Rome is a museum. It is a city that is a museum. So I've never seen any place like that on earth. You walk out your door and there's 2,000-year-old relics, like just standing there. It's just an amazing city. But I mean, I love the culture. Seeing now, I just travel so often, as I'm sure you have too with your career. I mean, Spain, I love different parts of Spain. Barcelona is beautiful. Just got back from Croatia. The coast of Croatia on the Adriatic Sea is majestic. It's so anyway, just so many beautiful cities. And I was so myopic as an American living in New York, and now that I'm exploring the world, it's just beautiful to see the culture.
Right, it's awesome. It's something that, like you say, most people don't even know. They don't even know what you're missing out on. I've got kids, and I want to take them everywhere in the world before they turn 15. So we like to travel and spend summers abroad. Anyways, some of the other questions I have. What's your favorite cheat meal?
Cheat meal? Pizza, no question. I don't even know if I call pizza cheat meal. I can make a case that you got your cheese, you put anchovies on it, you get your.
You want to have it. You want to have it if it fits your macros conversation now, don't you?
But no, pizza is. I could live on pizza if I, give them my druthers. So.
Sure, man. What's your favorite piece of technology? Are you a tech guy?
I mean, probably a smartphone now. It's just I forgot my smartphone at home, and I felt completely lost. So it's amazing how you get tied to technology.
I try to leave mine at home on purpose as often as I can. So you're a pizza guy. Who's your favorite Ninja Turtle?
I have never watched the Ninja Turtles.
Come on, man. All right.
I don't have kids,
I'm just playing with you, man. I'm just playing with you. Cool, Brad. Awesome, man. So grateful to have you on. As always, I think it's hugely beneficial. I don't even think we scratched the surface. I think we just started to, just scratch the surface. And I'd love to have you back and maybe dig deep on like one specific thing that you're loving. And that's kind of the way I started the conversation. Is what are you loving right now? So instead of going wide next time, maybe we'll go really, really deep and get into some of the cellular signaling and the mechanisms. And because people like that stuff, man. My followers, believe it or not, are the guys who are the nerdy muscle heads, and they like that stuff. And when I don't do it, they get mad at me. Like, why didn't you ask that question? I'm like, man, because our demographic is pretty broad, and I don't want to get into the nerdy like words and the lingo that nobody's heard of. But they get mad at me, so I think sometimes we got to give them what they want, right?
I'd love to do it again anytime.
Cool, man. Dude, I appreciate you so much. Have yourself a great day, Brad. Everybody, if you want to catch Brad Schoenfeld, what's the website, Brad? Look Better Naked?
Look Great Naked.
Look Great Naked.
Yeah, it's always superlative. You can look better. I'd rather look great.
Look awesome. Are you on social media at all, Brad?
Yeah, Facebook. They could just search me: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are the 3 that I spend time on.
Cool. And if anybody wants to reach Brad, he'll also have all his links, or the links to social and his websites on the show notes for this, which is benpakulski.com/Brad. And everybody have a great day.